Now we have Mike Galsworthy. Mike is the director of scientists for the EU, and also involved in NHS against Brexit. Over to you, Mike.
Okay, thanks very much. Hi everyone. Actually, I might stand up so you can see me better there. I'd like to start by saying I agree with everything Elena said. In spirit and in analysis, I think she's spot on. And the fundamental issue here is our power to do right, our power to do good as a country and to each other as citizens. And is that going to be enhanced by us leaving the EU, or is it going to be diminished? And I think it's going to be vastly diminished. The big challenges that we all face on this planet are wild inequality, climate change, and migration management and crisis migration management. And I don't see us being able to do that very effectively when we leave a team that empowers us all to tackle that properly. When we go solo, when we get into maybe even potentially aggressive scenarios with our ex-neighbours where we're totally preoccupied by attempting to undercut them or reinvent wheels. I think we're putting ourselves into a very damaging situation which not only hurts us but fundamentally hurts our capacity to do good. And I do think that Labour as a party has shown some bold leadership in ideas in the general election of 2017, but has gone a little bit AWOL with leadership on these areas and these issues. And a perfectly illustrative point here is the free movement one. The fact that you had this Migration Advisory Committee report come back saying how free movement benefits us inward in terms of those citizens, in terms of enriching our culture, in terms of enriching our economy, and then without any analysis whatsoever of how it enriches our own citizens with their rights. And the government took this report and said that they're going to scratch free movement on that basis, and the Labour Party, I think Diane Abbott, broadly concurred without even the full analysis being done. And I think if you understand how citizens from other countries, both from the EU and outside, have been treated recently, and the idea that you're going to make it fair by taking all of the EU citizens and throwing it on the same broken system that has been poorly serving non-EU citizens and swamping our Home Office with that extra work is going to be very traumatic for all migrants in this country, and that's oftentimes our husbands and wives and partners, and it gets right into British families. And I think it's a sad state of affairs. Now, I run two campaigns. One is Scientists for EU, and the other is NHS against Brexit. Scientists for EU was spun out of Scientists for Labour. I'm a card-carrying Labour member. I was in the executive of Scientists for Labour, wrote the policy documents for the 2015 election from general election from Scientists for Labour. And with NHS against Brexit, that came from our previous campaign, Healthier in the EU, which I set up to reflect the health community, because my particular area of research is in health services research, and for me the privatisation of NHS England is particularly alarming, and that is particularly what I want to fight, to preserve a public NHS England, and also all of the frameworks of collaboration that we've built our neighbours around it. So that's where I'm coming from. Those are my drivers. So what I'd like to cover sort of briefly is then, how do we get in this mess where Labour seems sort of concussed and not taking on the right challenges in this area? What are some of the legitimate and sort of illegitimate grievances we have about the EU, which we need to sort of flesh out and, you know, trigger for conversation here? What does the EU and Brexit mean for science and the NHS? Very briefly, I realise there's a lot of content here. What are the choices that we've got right now, going forward, in terms of what we do, what our country does? And then I would like to end with why I think there is a hugely positive vision in stepping up now for a people's vote and taking on the challenges head on now instead of hoping that it will go away, which I do not think it will if we ignore it. So how do we get in this mess? I think one thing that has somewhat stunned the Labour Party is the move of the populist right to actually wrap themselves in left-wing trappings and parade as sheep when they're actually wolves wearing sheep's clothing. So Aaron Banks, before the whole referendum started, had some analysis done for him in terms of what he needed in order to get the country Brexiting. And he was told by the analysis that the analysts that he hired that he needed 4 million Labour votes. This is why when he set up Leave.eu, he said outright that he was going for Labour votes. That is what he was aiming for. And this is a guy that was part of the Conservative Party, like most of UKIP were, then contributed £100,000 to UKIP, then £1 million to UKIP, then ramped up the funding for Leave.eu. Remember, Nigel Farage also came from the Conservative Party, as did of the vast majority of the UKIP leaders. They are an outrider party for the Conservative Party that very much targeted Labour, and Leave.eu was a continuation of that. That trend was also picked up by Vote Leave, which also sought to play on grievances of the left. Look at the playing on the NHS, for example, and funds for the NHS, when characters such as Aaron Banks himself and Nigel Farage and Matthew Elliott of Taxpayers Alliance were all advocates previously of privatising the NHS. This is why I say wolves in sheep's clothing. But they played that tune in order to try and suck away from the Labour base the people they needed in order to get over the line. Even though it rang hollow in their own minds, they knew this is what they needed to do. This, I think, has been why it stunned Labour when the result came through as it did, because they didn't want to go and tackle that and aggravate it. It's almost as if the populist right or the right wing had caused all of these problems with all these communities left behind, sown these seeds, grew up that fruit, and then plucked it for themselves to take advantage of. And I think that we have been caught off guard by that quite badly, and we do need to fight to pull it back. So what we need to do is we do need to really think hard and fast about how we get on the front foot with the right narratives. There are some grievances that also factored into why the vote went the way it did. There is austerity, of course, which is a bad policy, and this is something that really hurt, because in Greece, for example, it was the first time that you actually had within the club of the EU some countries shafting over another country, which they did. You know, the bailout wasn't a Greek bailout, it was a bailout for French and German banks via Greece. And that is something that we need to address, but that fed in to the problems. The Greeks, however, didn't want us to Brexit, because how the hell does that help them? Polls at the time showed that they didn't want us to Brexit. In fact, what were we doing at the time? Instead of helping out with the Euro crisis or the immigration crisis, we were busy saying we want special terms for ourselves, and if we don't get it, we're going to shaft you all and leave. We do need to talk about issues of democracy. For me personally, I don't see how Brexit is going to help our democracy at all. How is it going to help our ability to have any say whatsoever at the international layer? We should be having a voice over our local environment, over our national environment, and then also over our international environment. If we throw out our MEPs and if we throw out our voting representation in the council, then how are we making policy, international policy, with our neighbours? It's just going to be our executive lobbying behind the scenes in very opaque ways to get what they want. And how much say will we have on all of that? Absolutely nothing. Maybe some issues will come up in manifestos, but are really, is one party going to beat another party on the international part of their manifestos? Not at all. They'll just have complete and utter liberty to do what they want when they get in power. So there's a shrinkage of democracy as well from Brexit. Moving on to how the EU has actually benefited a lot of our frameworks, I can talk about this from the science angle and the NHS angle. From the science angle, science is a very socialist endeavour, if you will. It is public money going into public institutions that are working overtly for public benefit in terms of health and wealth and knowledge generation. It is shared output increasingly as we have open access. I think science is a massive public good. Science is also internationalist in flavour. There are no foreigners in science. We all work together for common good. We do have that as free movement as possible around the world in order to engage those common endeavours. Our country does work for the benefit of other countries, and through the EU that has been hugely enhanced through the science programme, where we all pool money and policy and the way we do things in order to put together big multinational teams in order to really tackle challenges both in Europe and also around the world. And that includes targeted actions in Africa, in Asia, in South America, on health and policy and poverty issues there. And we also know that this brings massive benefits, because when we collaborate internationally, it has 40% more impact than when we do domestic only research. And the EU has been the glue on this. It's why European science is now above American science in terms of the impact that it has and the growth that it is achieving. And so science is a beautiful example of where the structure of the EU has really helped us all flourish. You also actually see it in the NHS, and a lot of people didn't realise that until about now, when they actually see what Brexit means. The NHS doesn't operate alone. The NHS sits within a whole set of frameworks of research and medicine supply and radioisotope supply and cross-border healthcare and mutual recognition of qualifications and movement of staff and rare disease frameworks, whereby we've got reference networks where we can pair up rare disease sufferers in one country with experts in another country, and patient support groups right across the continent. These are the kind of frameworks that we've built together over all of this time, under the radar to most people. But now that we've got the threat of Brexit, that is pulling us right out of all of those, and we are seeing the strain from the fallen pound. We are seeing the strain from a bonfire of money for Brexit instead of going into our doctors and nurses. We are seeing the strain from the European Medicines Agency moving and us threatening to come out of that framework and having medicines delayed thereby for breaking up that market. We're seeing the strain in terms of our research contracts with other European countries, all thrown up in the air. So you can see from those actually what we have built, and actually where the opportunity lies to enrich our country, to enrich our communities in conjunction with our universities, to enrich our healthcare system. This is what we should be gunning for. And I don't think that it is too late to make that argument, because people are now seeing the strain. Because we voted for Brexit, we are actually starting to walk through some of the hard landscape of what it actually means. We're actually getting that education. And we've got coming up three options. We can either accept whatever deal Theresa May brings back, or we can let ourselves crash out because we can't come to a deal, or we can challenge the deal, ditch it, and challenge Brexit outright. And that's the option that I favour, and it's not an easy option, and there is concern within the Labour Party that if you do have a people's vote and you do take it on, then you are challenging a fundamental tenet of democracy, that if you vote for something, then it will be done come hell or high water. You are giving fodder to UKIP that may make them flare up again. But then let's consider, let's say, okay, those are threats and challenges you have to take on. Let's look at the other two routes. Let's look at the route of crashing out. What does that mean? It means leaving all of those frameworks simultaneously. It means huge social and political turmoil. It means a pretty much immediate trade deal with Donald Trump, where we throw away all of our standards that we have built up. and we essentially allow him to come in with American agri standards as they want it, maybe allow him to come in and portion off our NHS to huge American companies, and basically being a 51st state as an emergency measure, and very antagonistic with the European countries as well. That is not an environment that I want our country to be in, economically or socially. It is very, very fertile ground for the populist right that would love a confrontational situation with Europe. I think that's highly dangerous. The other option of accepting the deal, accepting something that we all know is worse than EU membership, and even Boris Johnson will say so, that it's worse than EU membership, for a 2-year period until we then have a hard Brexit, whereby we're going straight into the deregulation again. Because what else was Brexit for? If you want to leave the customs union and single market, it's so that you can have rules diverge. And that is an option that has about 10% support from the public. Do we really want to say, yep, that's democracy, our executive are going to take us down a path that has the opposition of 90% of the public? That is going to cause a huge amount of fights as well for the next 2 years, and then we don't have the option of easily going back into the EU. We are stuck outside, and it's going to cause economic and social headaches as well. So that is why my preferred option is the people's vote, is saying that we've had 2.5 years of education now about what it really means. We have had enough opportunity for the government to come up with something good. They have had their chance by now to put forward a deal that, even if it doesn't look perfect for now, people might say, okay, yes, well, we'll take that, and then a few years down the line things will be better. It is right and fair that the people at this stage should be able to evaluate it and be able to say, okay, we'll take that deal, or be able to say, nope, you've had your chance, this doesn't work, this is a bust product, we don't want to buy this product, we have rights to reject this product. That is what I am advocating. And like Elena said actually this lunchtime, it is better to take it on now and take it on early than to let it fester and to let more control slip from our hands as we get further and further away and into the mires of difficulties ahead. So, to end it though, let's think about the positive. Because the problems that we face in the UK and in Europe, we also face around the world. Look at Brazil, look at America, look at elsewhere in Europe, look at the degradation of our liberal democracy in the hands of populism, which is flaring up. Wouldn't it be lovely if the first country in the world that sort of fell to this showed the rest of the world how to bounce back from this, by building up the communities of values that wasn't there before, that was taking things for granted. 150 regional groups around this country which are already strong, that can put together marches of 700,000 in London, that can do action days weekend after weekend, that can turn the tide, that can recapture all of our values of pragmatism, solidarity with our neighbours, community, responsibility. And through that mechanism, through the pushback from the people themselves, recapturing those values, demand that of our parliament, turn our parliament to give us the voice again, and then to bury this thing, and thereafter, after we bury Brexit, say, right, now let's deal with the problems that started Brexit, and here is a manifesto, here is a progressive Labour manifesto that directly tackles all of your grievances. It is now time for that new deal. And if we do that, think of the message that sends across Europe and across the world of how populations should respond when cynicism comes knocking. This is how, with love and determination in education, you push back and reset the model and go for the values that we should have been pushing for harder all those years ago. Thank you.